Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Episode. Here, we're continuing the series on the Steam Deck, more importantly, playing retro consoles via EmuDeck Emulation, and what games you should be playing. Because I have to remember, not everyone grew up with a Dreamcast. I imported one from Japan before it released in the US, and I made a mistake because that's how I learned about region locking. But we're going to be talking about my favorite games for the Dreamcast and the games I think you should play, some common ones and some deep cuts. Before I get too far involved, though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and that notification bell definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well. But right off the top, if you've never played Crazy Taxi, or if you've never played it on the Dreamcast, you 100% owe it to yourself to check it out. This is one of the games that just personifies the Dreamcast. If you open up an encyclopedia, who owns those anymore, but if you did, and you looked up an article on the Dreamcast, this is one of the games that's photo would be on the pages. This is part and parcel of the perfect game to talk about when you talk about Sega in this generation. Arcadey with a home console bend, doing absolutely whatever the hell they wanted to, and there was a Red Roof Pizza Hut, basically an extinct thing in our day and age. But this game is so simple to pick up and play. The gameplay is so obvious. Pick up a passenger, drive them as fast as you can to their destination. The fun comes in trying to get there as quick as possible, figuring out shortcuts and basically grazing vehicles to get that tip up. Because if you've ever worked in a tip position before, you know you need to do everything possible to make as much money and keep people happy. But the reason I recommend Crazy Taxi if you've never played it before is it really does define what the Dreamcast was all about. Visually, this is what the Dreamcast looked like. It was bright, it was colorful, and it was more impressive than anything else on the market at that point in time. It was also very experimental. A lot of games are things we had never seen before, and Dreamcast era feels like Sega at their absolute best, firing on all cylinders. This game you can play for 5 minutes, you can play for 10 minutes, you can play for an hour, and you're going to have an absolute blast. You just learn the course, learn the techniques, and go from there. Now, of course, it's my channel and I'm going to recommend a fighting game, but I'm going to go a little bit of a deeper cut here, and I'm going to go with Project Justice. Now, there's so many great and amazing arcade fighting games to play on Dreamcast, and Virtua Fighter 3 Team Battle would be up there for me, but this is a video talking about some of the less obvious choices on Dreamcast, and for me, this game definitely takes the cake. I love Rival Schools on PlayStation 1, and Project Justice is just an extension of that game. It is a team battle action game with some of the most absurd combos around. There's photography combos, there's team up in the sky battle combos. This has absolutely everything going on all at once, and it's just such a wild game. It's also, I think, one of the best looking 3D fighting games on the Dreamcast. All of the models are highly detailed with polygons, all of the backgrounds are made of polygons as well. It's bright and colorful, has a spectacular soundtrack, and again, is just the type of game that you can really sink your teeth into, especially if you have friends over. Give them the second controller, put your Steam Deck in a dock, and just have an absolute blast playing this. It's one of those fighting games where you can pick it up and get relatively good at it within a day, but it's going to take you months to 100% master everything that is going on, and that's what I love in a good fighting game. Something that can take you months and months and months to get good at, but you love every minute of it, you love to practice, and you love to play around with what's going on. And that's why if you're looking for a deeper cut fighting game for the Dreamcast, this is one I would 100% recommend. Now, moving over to the beat 'em up genre, if you've never played Dynamite Deka, also known as Dynamite Cop in the US, it is an absurd, crazy game. This is basically the sequel to Die Hard Arcade on the Sega Saturn, but Sega no longer had the Die Hard franchise, so they made a very similar game with completely new characters, but it really does feel like that true sequel to Die Hard Arcade. And when I say this game is strange, I mean it is really weird. It kind of starts out relatively normal, but within like the first 5 minutes, things just 100% go off the rails, and you have absolutely no idea what the hell's going on or why it's actually happening, and you have a massive smile on your face the entire time you're doing it. And of course, it is a 2-player game, so it's perfect with friends, and so many games on Dreamcast are amazing with people. I do not know if a Blast City arcade cabinet would blow up if you threw it, but they're rare and they're valuable, so definitely don't. But this game also has an amazing soundtrack, so listen for like 35 seconds, I'll come back and show you some more games.
Baby.
Just such a great and absurd soundtrack, and when we get into the standing room here, I'm just going to go onto this table, grab a French roll, more commonly known as a baguette, and I'm going to absolutely start wailing away on my opponents with it. Why are you using a baguette to fight somebody? I have absolutely no idea, but I'm having fun when I'm doing it. Or maybe I'll break a mannequin, grab the leg and the torso, and just start swinging it around wildly to take out my opponents. This is an awesome 3D beat 'em up because Sega was awesome at making 3D beat 'em ups, and it's also absurdly weird, my favorite type of game. But of course, we have been talking about fighting games, and one of the games that really personified just what the Dreamcast could do graphically and hardware-wise was Soul Calibur. As compared to the arcade version that you got in arcades, the Dreamcast version blows it away in absolutely every respect. And this was a launch title as well. This was impressive when it came out. Everyone's minds were blown that a home console could do this. And if you had a VGA monitor and hooked your Dreamcast up to a 31 kilohertz signal, it looked even that much better. But this is another one of those games. Soul Calibur as a franchise really isn't as big as it used to be. And if you're coming to Dreamcast and you didn't grow up with it, maybe you've never played Soul Calibur before, maybe you just see it on lists of best Dreamcast games of all time and you haven't given it a shot yet. That is why I'm recommending it here, but leave me a comment down below. Tell me what games you played in this video up to this point and what games you're just recently learning about or haven't tried yet, because I feel like right now I haven't really shown too many deep cuts, but the next game in this list is going to be as deep and esoteric as the deep cuts get. But mechanically, Soul Calibur is such a strong fighting game. It is again simple to pick up and play, but it takes a long time to master. But the fluidity at 60 Hz is spectacular, and on Steam Deck here, it is running exactly as you would expect via Flycast emulation. Now, I have absolutely every single game on original Dreamcast disc in my collection here, and I do play it on original hardware on a VGA monitor, but honestly, if I just want to upscale this on my couch and play on a 4K TV, this is an absolutely outstanding way to do it. I have absolutely no complaints of how it's running here. Definitely check out Soul Calibur if you have not. But I know I promised you a super esoteric deep cut, and here it comes. This is LOL, or Lack of Love, made by a Japanese developer called Lovedelic. That is how it is pronounced, to the best of my knowledge. This game is one of the most artistic, interesting, and visually arresting games on Dreamcast in my opinion. It barely tells you what you need to do, you're never 100% certain what the game's asking of you, but it is such an artistic travel through an evolution sim that it gets its hooks into you and you need to know what happens next. And it is one of those games, it is so simple, yet it leaves you with such a lasting impression. And the good thing is there is an English translation available now, which I am showing you here, but there's so little language in the game, I actually recommend you play it in Japanese. That way you can kind of stumble through the game and learn by the visual cues that are given to you on screen. But this intro is just so interesting and strange and dynamic and unique. The first time I played this game, I fell in love with it, and I still remember to this day how impressed I was on that first playthrough. But the main gameplay hook is it's an evolution sim. You start as this egg and you hatch as a creature, and you go through every single level learning what your creature can do, utilizing those traits to your advantage, and then evolving to the next stage until you basically get to the end game scenario. But as you come out of the literal primordial soup there, as this character, the game just tells you how to evolve. It shows it happening. You hit start, you see a map of the entire area, you see that you can pee, greet things, sleep, and strike, eat, or roar with those 4 face buttons, and then it gives you 3 characters in the game, and it makes them dark if you have seen them, or they're in shadow if you have not. You need to figure out how to interact with those characters so you can get a certain aspect from them to evolve. Like I said, it is very simple, but all of the artwork, the mix of polygons with 2D sprite-based elements, and the incredible soundtrack, and just the ultimate sort of artistic feeling of this game makes Lack of Love one of those games that if I could snap my fingers and make everyone play it once, I 100% would. This is a special game. I love it. It is unique, and it kind of does personify the Dreamcast, more weirder aspects where everyone was trying to do things experimentally. But take my word for it, play Lack of Love, please. Now, keeping with the experimental game theme on Dreamcast, if you've never played Space Channel 5 before, you 100% should check it out, because again, this was just Sega being Sega, which is to say doing weird things just because it seemed like a good idea at the time, and it definitely did pan out for them. Now, if you aren't into the music rhythm genre, you should still play this game because it's one of the best looking games on Dreamcast. The art direction, the colorways, everything about it just screams colorful Dreamcast era graphics. But the hook of the game is simple. There's a couple different buttons, you push them in time to the rhythm. If you have rhythm, you do well, and if you don't have rhythm like me, you struggle to play this game basically every single time you pick it up. But it doesn't matter that I struggle to play it, I always have a great time checking it out. And I will say that the Flycast emulation on Dreamcast does a really good job as well, because if this game lags whatsoever, getting the proper button inputs can be an ever-loving pain in the ass. But here, if you fail, it's because you made a mistake, not because there was any lag in the controls. Definitely is a game that's preferably played on an original Dreamcast, but Flycast and Steam Deck are doing a great job as well. But I will say this has some of the best music on the entire Dreamcast, so go ahead and listen for like 45 seconds or so, and I'll come back and show you some more of my favorite games.
Right, left, shoot, shoot, shoot. Down, up, down, hit, hit, hit. Down, up, shoot, shoot, shoot. I did it!
That was smooth, baby. Take it to the control tower.
Roger.
Eyes open, baby. Use the A button beam when they say Q.
Hit, hit, hit. Here we go. Shoot.
If that song is not stuck in your head, I don't know how it isn't, because I just heard it doing this voiceover and it's going to be rolling around in my gray matter for the next week. But again, this just screams Dreamcast, and even if you grew up in the Dreamcast era, that doesn't mean you played Space Channel 5, because I barely remember anyone talking about this when I was a kid, and I did not play it when I had an original Dreamcast. I came to it later on in life. Absolutely love it. 10 out of 10. Recommend. Now on to the obvious games that I absolutely love. The House of the Dead 2 is one of my favorite light gun games of all time, and the light gun genre is one of my favorite genres of all time. It is amazing on Dreamcast, and it does work on Steam Deck. Now, of course, you're not going to be pointing a light gun at your Steam Deck, but if you have a Sinden light gun and you want to get really tricky, it probably does work. It's going to be a real pain in the butt. But you can still play this on your Steam Deck, and I recommend you check it out just to get a sense of what was going on back in the Dreamcast era, because when we saw these graphics at home, you couldn't believe this was in your living room. This was the first time that it really truly felt like the arcade was at home, outside if you were one of the rich kids that owned a Neo Geo back in the day. This game has never gotten old in the decade since it came out. I will still play this once a year and absolutely have a blast with it. And again, it's just such an interesting and fun game. And I love the gore effects as well, as you shoot the zombies' heads and their brains just literally splatter across the floor. It is such a great look, and this series would get less and less violent as it went on. Once you get to House of the Dead 4 or Scarlet Dawn, it basically loses the violence in and of itself, which is just such a bummer, because I love shooting holes in the chests of zombies as they rush at me, and I love those eyes there that literally will just kind of fall out of their skulls if you shoot them just right. This is just, again, defining game of the Dreamcast, and I know that everyone loves the light gun genre, or maybe you don't have a CRT around to play them on original hardware like I do here, but you can still check it out on Steam Deck, and you can basically transpose the light gun controls to mouse, so it is relatively easy to play this. If you don't want to use the control stick, you can use a mouse emulating that light gun as well. But it's such a dark game as well. This daughter and son just watch their mother die in front of them in the game. It doesn't pull any punches, and I just love everything about it. And I would probably say graphically and stylistically, this is my favorite House of the Dead entry of all time, followed closely by the original House of the Dead. Maybe if you ask me next week, that one might be my favorite. Leave me a comment down below and tell me what your favorite House of the Dead game is, because there is a ton to pick from. Now on the RPG side, I'm going to recommend one and one game only. That's not to say that there's not a ton of amazing RPGs on the Dreamcast. It's just me saying that this is the one that I always think of. And I'm just showing you the intro because I don't want to spoil any of this if you've never played it before. Because Skies of Arcadia is an absolute amazing adventure that you're going to take in the role-playing game genre. It has everything you want: amazing graphics, amazing story, soundtrack, gameplay. It is just a 10 out of 10 Hall of Fame first ballot RPG, and for my money, the best on the system. But tell me down below if you've played this before or what you think the best RPG on the Dreamcast is. I'm kind of assuming that like 7 out of 10 people will agree with me, but I think there's going to be a few people out there that say Grandia 2 as well, and that is definitely a game I can 100% recommend. I played it back in the day. I played it about 5 years ago, and it still 100% holds up. But still, for my money, if you're looking for one role-playing game to play on Dreamcast, you gotta make it Skies of Arcadia. And this game was remade later on, or basically ported to newer systems, but it looks the best on Dreamcast, because don't forget, just because Dreamcast came before systems like GameCube or PlayStation 2, doesn't mean it can't look as good, if not better than those systems, if the developers and artists are using the hardware of the Dreamcast how it was intended to and maximizing those efforts. Now, this is just style, it's got substance, it's got flair, it's got a personality, and it's an adventure that you're never going to forget. You're going to love every minute of playing this game. The only way you won't love it is if you don't like RPGs whatsoever, and if you don't, this recommendation was useless for you, and we should probably move on to the next game in the list, but trust me, it's amazing. Now, if Skies of Arcadia is bright, cheery, and colorful, then Resident Evil Code Veronica is the exact opposite, because it's dark and it is horror-filled. But this is classic Resident Evil survival horror before they kind of pivoted in Resident Evil 4 moving forward, and it's the only game that Capcom has not remade from that original batch of games, which is really surprising because this is one of my favorite Resident Evils of all time, and if you didn't grow up playing Dreamcast or you didn't get this game on PlayStation 2, then maybe you've never actually experienced Code Veronica. It is slightly different than the original games because it doesn't use the pre-rendered backgrounds, it draws everything in 3D polygons, but otherwise this is the classic survival horror formula that everyone fell in love with the original RE games, and it's one of those things I just don't understand why more people don't talk about this one. Now, fair warning, it does open slightly slow until you get into the main mansion in the game. And perhaps it's that slowness at the start that didn't hook people in the same way that they got hooked in to Resident Evil 1 or 2. But I mean it when I tell you this is an absolutely spectacular Resident Evil game, and it is, in my opinion, right up there with Resident Evil and Resident Evil 2. And it works perfectly on Steam Deck as well. And it's great as a handheld experience as well, because you can just play it on the train, you can play it wherever you want. You don't need to be attached to your Dreamcast or to your PlayStation 2. Now, obviously, there is a Steam version of all of the Resident Evil games, but just playing it via the Dreamcast original is one of my favorite ways to play it, because this is how the game was originally presented to players. This started as a Dreamcast exclusive, then obviously as the Dreamcast failed, it was pivoted to other consoles, but for my money, the Dreamcast look, the Dreamcast version, is the way you want to play Code Veronica. And like I said, once you get into the main mansion in the game, this is just incredible Resident Evil with a slight twist, because you'll see the cameras following us and those walls are in 3D, they're not pre-rendered. But if somehow you've never played Code Veronica, definitely check it out on Dreamcast. It is my preferred version. Now, of course, there's no video that I could recommend about Dreamcast games to play if I didn't talk about Sonic Adventure, because this is the quintessential Dreamcast game, but again, if you didn't grow up in this era, maybe you've never actually stopped to play it. And like the other mentions in this video, you can get PC versions of this as well, but I still think the best way to play and experience Sonic Adventure is going to be on the Dreamcast, because it's probably the least buggy version in my opinion, unless you get into the fan patch territory. But when this game first came out, and it first came to home consoles, what you're seeing on the screen blew everybody away. This was graphics in the PlayStation 1, Nintendo 64 era, but it was at home from Sega, and it just looked like this. Now, I'm not going to lie to you and say that Sonic Adventure is a 10 out of 10 game. It's definitely buggy and it's definitely aged, but if you want to understand what the Dreamcast did and why it was so popular back on $99.99, you need to play this and experience it, because this level right here, the intro, as this whale is going to start rushing us towards the camera, when you first saw this as a kid or even as an adult back in the day, you would never seen anything like this on your television at home that you could actually play. And that's the number one reason why this is on my must-play list of Dreamcast games on Steam Deck, because I think the graphics really hold up well on the Steam Deck screen as well. With a little bit of that internal resolution bump, you get awesome performance, and it just feels really good on these Steam Deck controls. But this is basically one of the most popular, historical, and just well-known Dreamcast games, and it is for a very big reason. It's the first time Sonic went 3D, it's the first time we had seen graphics of this caliber on a home console, and it just really explains what the Dreamcast was all about. Now, Sonic Adventure 2, also a great game, but I only wanted to recommend one, and for me, I actually prefer the original game over the sequel. Maybe by like 2 to 3%, but whichever game you play, you can't go wrong with Sonic Adventure. But if you've never played the original, I can't recommend it enough. Now, on a personal pick, I love San Francisco Rush. San Francisco Rush 2049 is not my favorite game in the series, but it is one of my favorite racing games on the Dreamcast. And there were so many I could have recommended. Leave me a comment down below and tell me what your favorite racing game is. But if you've never played a San Francisco Rush game, you're 100% in for a treat. There's shortcuts aplenty, and you're going to blow up a lot trying to take them. But this game is just pure arcade racing action from start to finish. The physics are unlike any place you've ever been on Earth or space, and I just say that because I don't think anyone that watches the channel has ever been in space. Leave me a comment down below and prove me wrong. But the controls, the loftiness, the jumps, the shortcuts, this is the arcade experience at home, because this was an arcade board as well, but the Dreamcast version is on par, if not slightly better looking in my opinion, than what we got in arcades. But this is just an incredible game, especially if you have friends around. It is big, it's intense, there's always spectacle going on, there's so many shortcuts and collectibles. It's the type of game that you're only going to play for 10 minutes and somehow you lose 2 hours to trying to find all the shortcuts, because I just passed one by there, but if we just turn around you're going to see there's so many different places to go in San Francisco Rush 2049. It's the type of game that you just become addicted to. Now, I know some people don't love the physics of the San Francisco Rush series, but just take my word for it. Give it one more try, because once you get used to how the cars operate, how they drift around corners, and how they float, you're going to have an absolute blast with this game. This is just another one of those Dreamcast games that when I think about the hardware, I think about the console, one of the first games that pops into mind is Rush 2049. Now, it wasn't the Nintendo 64, and it's not a bad version, but for my money, obviously, the Dreamcast version is the one to play, and if you've never checked it out, you owe it to me and yourself to do so. Now, one of the games I played the most out of any other game back in the day when I owned a Dreamcast, played it with friends, played it alone, played it every chance I got, is Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2. Now, the Tony Hawk Pro Skater franchise has definitely lost a step or dozen since these original games, but I will tell you, back in the day, this was just considered a perfect game, and it still holds up. It is so simple to learn how to play this game, but learning all the lines, getting all the high scores, figuring out shortcuts and secrets, that's where the real depth comes in. And trust me, this is a game that is made infinitely better with friends. Invite friends over, grab a 6-pack of beer, or I mean, hey, if they're my friends, grab a 30-pack of beer, and just start playing. You're going to have an absolute blast of a time. Now, if you want to just be completely frustrated in a good way, then Ikaruga is going to be for you. It's one of the most famous shmups on Dreamcast, and it's what I picked for this because I feel like it's the most indicative of what a Dreamcast shmup is all about. You will see that we have 2 different color projectiles, 2 different color ships, and 2 different color enemies. You need to change the color of your ship as you play the game, or else when you shoot with the wrong color, you're going to have suicide bullets coming towards you. It takes an infinite amount of time to understand what's going on, but when it finally does click, there is no better challenge as far as a shmup's concerned than Ikaruga on Dreamcast. Now, one game I wanted to recommend, but unfortunately I cannot, is Bangai-O. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's how I've always said it. On Steam Deck, this thing just chugs when you destroy enemies. But interestingly enough, I took it over to Flycast on my editing PC, a 12900K, with a 3090, and it chugged here as well. So there must be an issue with the emulation. I do own this on an original disc, and I do play it on my Dreamcast, on my CRT television, a decent amount. So I'm going to tell you, I can't recommend you play it on your Steam Deck, but I do recommend you find another way to play it. It's an absolutely unique and spectacularly interesting game that I feel like a lot of people just don't know about, but like you saw there, it definitely chugs hard. And the last game I'm going to recommend, if you've never played Shenmue before, this is one of those Dreamcast games you have to experience at least once, because not only is it indicative of what the Dreamcast was doing, it was indicative of what Sega was developing in the late 90s. And this sort of genre, a Shenmue feeling game, basically doesn't exist any longer. But what I am going to tell you is you want to play the original Shenmue, you want to play the undub edition. All English language and all of the menus, like the English language disc we got in the North American region, but you're getting all of the Japanese voice acting. And don't get me wrong, I love janky voice acting and Shenmue has it in spades, but the Japanese makes it feel that much more interesting. And what other game is going to open with a kitten? Whether you like cats, whether you don't like cats, Shenmue went hard in kitten territory, and for some people that's all you really need to tell them they're going to enjoy something. All jokes aside, it's just a classic Dreamcast game. But those are the games I recommend you start with. Leave me a comment down below and tell me what you would have picked, because I could have added so many games to this list, but I tried to go with a couple of mainstream picks and some deep cuts that I really want people to experience. Share that on another Steam Deck video next Saturday. I'll have videos throughout the week, but our Dreamcast Expo is done, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.